Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to give it a moment for everyone to sign in. I've just launched it here, and it then has to take a lot of time to let everybody into the room. So let's give a moment for that to happen. As people enter the room, you are automatically muted and without camera, so you don't have to worry how your hair looks today after this long in quarantine. So yeah, the numbers are still rising as people enter into our room. Once it starts to stable a little bit, I can get us started. Okay. Still rising. While we're getting started, if you'd like, I see a few already using the chat panel to say hello. If you want to say hello and where you're from, that'd be a lot of fun. I see a few familiar names: Laurent from Paris, Scott Weimer, LA, Luke Wardle from China, Lori from Phoenix. Hello, everybody. So great to see you. Garima from New Delhi, Harris, New York. Linda from France. Now it's going too fast to even read, but hey. Gregor from the UK. Jan from Colorado. Richard from Richmond. James Dillon from Paris. Hello. I'm so glad that you're all able to join us. Yeah, it's getting very hard to read them. They're going pretty fast, as you can see. Gretchen from Colorado. Oh, Chicago. That's someone else from Colorado. Welcome, everybody. There's Cenk from Istanbul. We have people from all over the world today. New Delhi may be our furthest for today's call, and it might be pretty late there. Jason Sackett from LA says, Jeff's hair always looks great.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that.
I tell you, I get suspicious of people with really short hair during lockdown. I'm like, how are you keeping your hair looking like that?
Mine is really long today. Mine is really long, so there's a lot of stuff in it to keep it from falling into my face today. So,
Aida from Buenos Aires. Oh wow, we have Benedicte from Togo in Africa. Another one from Jeremy, our coach, who has moved to Rwanda, and that's where he's calling in from. Gregor Finlay tells us that we should be using clippers for our hair. Lori Zahn from Denver. Okay, it looks like we're getting most of the people into the room who are supposed to be here. So we'd like to welcome you to our second edition or our repeat edition, encore edition of today's webinar. We did it 1 week ago and learned the hard way that we thought we had plenty of seats from the Zoom, but we didn't. And so literally hundreds of people got locked out, which felt awful. So we're doing it again. We're also recording it. So if you can't stay or you know someone who missed it, you can pick up that recording. It was very popular and very well received. So I'm really excited that Jeff has agreed to do it a second time for us. First of all, for those of you who don't know Coach Source, yes, thank you, Jeff. Those of you who don't know Coach Source is an executive coaching firm and one of the largest in the world. We have 1,100 coaches who are serving over 100 countries. Some of them are here, of course, with us on the thread here. And we serve clients of all sizes with executive coaching, mostly. We also do team coaching, group coaching, and we even have coaching software to manage coaching activities for large companies. We have a few announcements to share with you today that will come after the webinar, including a new crisis coaching service that we'd like to share with you. And as well, new coaching research is underway, and we'd love for everyone here to consider taking part in the research. Now, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jeff Nally, who's here. Jeff was an internal coach at Humana, which is a Fortune 500 company. And he was there for 9 years, as well as other HR jobs that he had before then. Jeff has a training in neuroscience, and he's going to cover some of that with us. He has his training from the Neuro Leadership Group, and then graduated with distinction with a certificate in the Foundations of Neuro Leadership from the Neuro Leadership Institute. He earned a coaching supervision certification and leads professional development for experienced coaches. Now, Jeff actually was our client at Humana. That's how I met him. And I had said, boy, if he goes out on his own, we got to find a way to hire him. And he's worked here at CoachSource in different capacities for a number of years, as well as running his own business too. But here at CoachSource, his latest title, which only just kicked in not long ago, he's actually vice president of the global coach community. So he's in charge of strategy, development, and connectivity for over our 1,100 coaches. He's also a member of the National Speakers Association. He's a PCC at ICF, and he's even co-authored 2 books, Rethinking Human Resources and Humans at Work. So he is quite well accredited, I suppose. And so we're really thrilled to have him doing this encore presentation for us. And Jeff, I will hand it over to you now.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brian, and hello, everyone. It's so good to see you on today's webinar. And for those of you watching the recording, thanks for taking time to do that. I hope you'll find this interesting and useful at the same time. Today's topic is about finding your way without losing your mind. If you're leading a team or leading yourself or influencing others, this is a time of uncertainty that is really unprecedented for all of us. As you know, between the COVID-19 crisis and all of the ripple effects that occur from that in our personal lives, in our organizations, in our communities, it just seems to touch and impact everything. As an executive coach, I've been coaching hospital CEOs and directors and leaders inside senior care facilities as we move through this crisis. And you know, their major concern right now is I'm trying to find my way and keep everyone safe and healthy without losing my mind. That's the only thing I'm really focused on. Like you, I've spoken with other entrepreneurs, business owners, speakers, trainers, even other coaches who have said that this challenge is really causing them to rethink their entire business model, who they are, what they offer, who their clients are, what they serve, and then how they will actually exist or be very, very different after the COVID crisis starts to ease and the next change or the next wave of changes happen in people's lives or in their organizations. So we are just full of all kinds of triggers, uncertainty, and things that are causing us to really second guess, be stressed, and really make it difficult for many of us to move from day to day to day. So what I'd like you to do is to go into the chat function, and if you'll type in your response to this question, we'll see what's out there. What's the one thing that is triggering your emotion, your stress, your brain right now, and really gets you out of whack, either for your role, your job in your company, or the thing that you lead for yourself, or just for you in your own life? What's something, the main thing, that triggers you and causes stress and uncertainty? Brian, what are we seeing in the chat today? I'm sorry, Brian, you're on mute, so you may want to unmute yourself first.
I was sounding so good for the last minute that I was saying things. Uncertainty, the fear in my clients, a sense of restlessness or not doing enough to help. Financial security, paying the mortgage, worrying about health and safety of my family, lack of control of the situation. Here's another one about financial security. Confinement and lack of human contact. A number of them are just simply saying uncertainty.
Yeah.
Boredom. Someone's just scared of COVID-19. Being cooped up with my wife and son and dealing with their various anxieties.
Yep, it's true.
Economic impact, fear of the future world for my grown children,
Mm,
a period of extended uncertainty, seeing my team struggle with uncertainty, selfishness of others who don't give a F about the public good.
mhm.
What will the new normal look like? A couple more on financial as well.
Great. Thank
Being
you
in the
for that.
presence of others. Last time someone wrote a lethargic or lethargy, which I liked a lot.
Right.
Sometimes I feel
Lethargy.
that attacks me even. Knowing my
Yeah.
son will have to start college online. Yeah, that would be a tough one.
Mm.
Too many webinars. Yeah.
Well, hopefully this webinar will be easy on your brain. But yes, those are all really immediate human common things that we've been hearing, and you've probably been hearing from others as well. The isolation, but then also the being in the home with family or friends or wherever you happen to be working from home or sequestered or just need to shelter in place because it's the safe thing to do. Even that has a lot of stressors around it. So today we're going to be talking about how to find your way through this using neuroscience without losing your mind that will at least dampen the stress and allow you to have a new, better, or different thought and a way forward when things remain uncertain and they're out of your control. So here are some of the things we're going to be learning together today. One, we're going to talk about the neuroscience of losing your mind. And next, we'll take a look at what's it like to dampen emotions versus control them. We'll take a look at the leader as observer during stress and uncertainty, and then how to communicate as a peer, as a friend, as a leader when times are uncertain and when there is rapid change. And then finally, we'll look at creating a competitive advantage and how you can do that for yourself and or your team and your organization during a time of crisis. All right. So for all the things that you typed into the chat, let's take a look at what's happening in your brain when you're experiencing those stressors, when you're uncertain, or when change comes at us and we can't control it. Now, for all of my neuroscience nerd friends out there on the webinar today, this will be just a few moments that you'll really enjoy. For everyone else, I want to make sure that you know two things. The first is, even though we're going to talk about the neuroscience of finding your way without losing your mind, there will be no probes and no electrodes in your brain today, I promise. Also, second thing is that even in my live audiences, by the way, we don't use probes or electrodes in people's brains to talk about your brain on change. The second thing we're going to talk about today is, and I want to make sure that you're aware of, is there are just three areas of the brain that you need to be familiar with so that you can understand how they operate when you're uncertain, when we experience change, and when you're trying to lead yourself and others through a crisis. So I promise you that if you are a neuroscience nerd, you are going to be very disappointed because we're only going to spend a couple of minutes on this. For those of you who are like, oh my gosh, I see a slide with a brain on it, I don't want an hour lecture on brain science. Good news, you are not getting an hour lecture on brain science, just a brief overview of three areas of the brain that are in play and that interact with each other so you know how to lead with uncertainty. All right, so at the center of this brain is the amygdala in red. That's the emotional center of your brain, right? We receive and experience everything through emotions first, and then we seem to figure out what to do with it next. But emotions are at play in everything that we do. You've probably heard of the amygdala hijack, when your emotions get so overtaken by stress or fear or threat or crisis that you literally can't think clearly. I'm going to show you what happens in your brain when that occurs. The long-term memory, or this part of the brain in the back, is kind of where we go on autopilot. Once we learn something or figure it out or make a decision, we actually make a neural map of that story, a collection of neurons that hardwires what we've decided to do, and we've learned that, and we put it back in our brain so we don't have to think about it. That's the part of your brain where you don't actually have to think about how to start a car and drive it every day. You've done it so much, you've practiced it so much, it's literally something you do on autopilot. And then the prefrontal cortex, that's this little spot right behind your forehead. And that's the part of your brain that is on and open right now. It's where we take in new information, where we make observations, and we look around to see what's happening in the world around us. We tease out or play with 2 or maybe 3 things that we've brought into our brain, and then try to figure them out. What is it we need to pay attention to? Is there a decision I need to make here? How can I take a look at what's complex and decide what to do with it? And then once we've made a decision, we put that back in the back part of our brain and our long-term memory, if you will, so we don't have to think about it again, and we can move forward to the next unfamiliar thing. Now, what's great about the prefrontal cortex is it's where we have our insights. It's where we have those aha moments when we're not thinking about a problem, but suddenly an answer pops in our head. Or we may have been pondering a problem about our work or about things that don't have a clear answer, and seemingly out of nowhere on the weekend, when we're not even focused on work, a next action or the next step seems to pop in our head. That's occurring right here in the prefrontal cortex. Now, why are these 3 parts of the brain important? Well, when our amygdala, when our emotions, when our stress is really elevated, either in a full-blown hijack, or it's just that email that pops in your inbox and you see who it's from and what the topic's about, and you go, oh, not again, and you stress out over it. When that happens, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. It means you're not taking in information clearly. You're not likely to have a new insight or a new idea, or even to know the next step that you want to take. So when our emotions are triggered, or they're elevated, or we're in a full-blown overload, in some of the ways that you mentioned in the chat just a few moments ago, we can't think clearly, and it's hard for us to make decisions. So let me ask you to go to the chat again, and I'd like you to answer this question. Where or when do you have your best ideas, your insights, your aha moments, your next step? Where are those prefrontal cortex aha moments happening for you?
All right. So where are these ideas coming? And I joked last time, I don't know if we want to know this, Jeff, but because a lot of showers, actually, most of them right now are shower, brushing teeth.
Okay.
That's good. Meditating, dancing, walking the dog, styling my hair, which is obviously a theme today, cutting grass, morning walk when I'm in flow. Excuse me, when I'm in flow. Away from the computer, walking, meditating, in my garden, cooking, working out, prayer before I get up. When I'm out doing routine tasks, anything when my mind is quieter, walking, garden, waking up at night thinking. For me, Jeff, it's when I'm trying to go to sleep. Someone else wrote that too. When I can't get sleep, and turn it into something positive and get active. Shower, collaborating with other creative minds. When I'm in my right brain, running, it keeps going.
Excellent, great. So those are all excellent responses. And that's right, our brain jumps into this state when we are in flow, when we're not focused on the problem or the stressor, and we're likely doing something else that causes us to be reflective. We may be thinking about nothing, like I am when I'm styling my hair, or I may just be in a zone where I'm not thinking about anything in particular. I'm running. I'm doing something that's automatic and that kind of puts me on autopilot. That's when our brain is in that reflective state. And you're right, that's when we have those insights. Now, the challenge is that we don't always have those insights or aha moments or grand ideas when they're most useful as we lead ourselves, lead a team, or work with others in an organization, even when we're working remotely. I mean, I noticed no one wrote in the chat, I have my best ideas and insights when I'm at my cubicle at the corporate office and people are making noise around me and I have 800 emails in my inbox. Nobody said that, right? So, so the challenge is to figure out how can we have those insights and have our brain in that mode when it needs to be in the midst of a crisis, when we're in a moment of challenge or complexity with our team, when we're on a Zoom call and we're trying to work through an issue with a staff meeting. Why can't we have those good, bright, insightful ideas then? Well, I know some of you may be looking at the chat and thinking, well, I'll just do those things that are on the chat. As an HR professional, let me state for the record, you do not have meetings in the shower just because that's where everybody has their best idea. So do not have everyone jump in the shower and have a meeting. That's not what this means. Sometimes it has been, before COVID, it has been okay for us to take team walks and to get outside and to have a team exercise or a team conversation while we take a walk around the block. But it's very unlikely you're going to be able to take the team on a stroll in nature, or everybody put their running shoes on and go running and have a successful project team update at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 5 ways to dampen your emotion, to get your brain in that state where your emotions are neutral to slightly positive. You're not focused on your background thinking or things that are on autopilot or your previous experience. And your prefrontal cortex is open. In a functional MRI scan, we would see this part of your brain active and the back part of your brain being quiet. So, and these are ways that you can get your brain in that state at work, while you're with your team, or you're in the moment of crisis or uncertainty. The first way to dampen your emotion and open that prefrontal cortex is to name your emotion. So when our son was in kindergarten, I sat in class one day, as most parents do, especially for your first child, you just kind of follow everything so you understand how it happens. And there were 2 other kids down front in the class that were causing a disruption and not paying attention. And the teacher looked at them and she said, "All right, use your words. Tell me how you feel." And even as a coach, I sat in the back of the room and I thought, wow, that's kind of fluffy and unusual. Wonder how that's going to get people to calm down. Well, it turns out when we accurately, specifically name our emotions, it dampens our amygdala. In functional MRI studies, we actually have a braking system that says if you accurately, specifically name how you're feeling, just say the word, it doesn't spiral your emotions out of control or take you deeper into that emotion. It actually causes your amygdala to drop to neutral to slightly positive emotional state. It opens up your prefrontal cortex and gets you off of your script or your autopilot in the back of your brain and lets you have a new idea or a new thought or just refocus your attention. And that's what that kindergarten teacher was doing. Name your emotions to tame your emotions. And then you can refocus people's attention like your own. You can have a new idea or an insight. We dampen our emotions by naming them. And so what's important here is that not that you memorize a big vocabulary list of emotions, but just be aware that as most humans are, we were not taught a big vocabulary list of emotions. We were not given a lot of emotional literacy training as children or adults. There's a lot more of that now than there used to be 10 or 15 years ago. But we tend to think in polarities. I'm either happy or I'm sad. We don't necessarily say, I'm feeling perplexed, or is it confused? Well, it turns out naming the emotion accurately and specifically is the way to dampen your stress. So you can have a new idea, refocus your attention, have an insight, and move forward. So name the emotion you're experiencing. And if you don't have a good list, just Google emotional literacy list, print one out, tuck it in your folio, tape it next to your screen, and when you're in the moment, feeling stressed, look through the list and just find the exact emotion you're feeling and name it to tame it. There are a lot of things that trigger our emotions, especially now and in a crisis, that we can't control. We don't have any influence really to even change it or alter it. And some of it is like this virus, COVID-19 that we're experiencing. We don't have control over it yet. We can't seem to influence it. We're just reacting to ways to try to be safe. There are lots of things that happen in our organizations as leaders or as teams. Budgets get cut. If you're an HR professional right now, I've talked to many of my colleagues. You are handling furloughs and layoffs and unemployment. You are trying to retain the best talent. You're trying to get talent to work from home or away from each other. And so you can't control all those things. You're just trying to move through them. So I'd like you to look at the screen now and take a look at this painting. Now, I want to assure you that this is not a specific Rorschach test. It's just a painting. And let's assume this is the challenge or crisis you cannot control. Can't change the painting. But you may see some things there, things you don't like, things you can't change, things you can't influence. If I put this gold formal frame around it, maybe that causes you to see something different in the painting. Maybe the structure of the frame or the scrolls and the architecture of the frame make something in the painting stand out for you. If I put this frame around it, this blue frame, now maybe the oranges tend to pop out and you see those colors and shapes. Or maybe it's the blues that kind of blend in with the frame, and that's what you're noticing. And if I put this black frame around that painting, now maybe it has even different meaning for you. Now maybe you see some depth or something in the background that really didn't stand out before. So the purpose of this is to give you the second way to dampen your emotions so that you can lead without losing your mind and start to think more clearly and activate your prefrontal cortex. And that's to reframe what you're experiencing. Now, you can't sometimes put a literal frame around what you're experiencing. We do that through questions. And the reframing questions that are the most powerful here when you are experiencing something you can't control or influence or change is to ask, what can I learn? That's the frame that lets you look at that painting and say, if I can't change anything about it, what can I learn here? Turns out when our brains are in that curiosity mode, our emotions go to neutral or slightly positive. Our prefrontal cortex is open. We are not focused on our previous experience or our autopilot thinking. And that helps us have a new insight or a new idea. You know, other reframing questions you can ask yourself or the team are, what do I see here that's important to me or that's just useful or helpful? What is it about this situation that helps me achieve something that's important to the team, even though I may not have seen it at the beginning? And what about this situation might benefit our team or help us do something that's needed for our team that we weren't able to do 8 weeks ago? Reframing questions cause us to look at situations differently, dampen our stress, and let us have a new insight about it. There are also other things that happen to us that cause us to have our emotions go out of whack and sometimes make us think we're losing our minds. I worked for one large company, and we had recently purchased and acquired another company, and my job was to lead group coaching for 80 executives, the top 80 leaders in the company, of which most of them were really happy being a separate company. They did not want to be acquired. Their stress level was really turned up because their attention was not focused on things they did well, like efficiencies or getting directly in front of their customers and managing all of the locations where their customers entered so that they could participate, buy products, get services that were really helpful and useful. So in the coaching, one of the things that seemed to dampen their stress and to help them refocus was to reprioritize what was important to them in that moment. So they dampened their emotion by reprioritizing what was on their plate. And it turns out when we prioritize or reprioritize what's in front of us, it causes our brain to go into that reflective state, and we can dampen our emotions and our stress and focus on something differently. For instance, some of the best reprioritization questions are, what priority is this crisis or thing for me? When is this a priority? Now, next week, next year? For whom is this a priority? Is it for me or my team? Or maybe it's a priority for our suppliers, or customers, or vendors. Asking those questions help us figure out and put into some kind of order what our next steps might be, who needs to be involved, and when that needs to happen. For the team that I was coaching of the acquired company, they realized that, the priority for us as the 80 top leaders in the company is to find a way to connect and create a relationship with the company that just acquired us. It turns out they don't do the thing that we do for a living. We're their only outlet to make this happen. We're a shining star. And so we'll get back to efficiencies and focusing on our outlets once the acquisition is over. But our priority is about creating relationships and figuring out how do we fit in to the rest of this larger organization. You know, the COVID-19 crisis seems unique. It seems very new, but if you're of a certain age and if you've been watching some of the news stories, you realize this is not the first pandemic that we've experienced. It's different than many, but it's got a lot of similarities. We've seen some comparison and contrast to the Spanish flu or to the AIDS HIV crisis of the 80s and 90s. And so sometimes when we are stressed and are in the midst of a crisis, it's important to look at what is not unique or what is not different about what we're experiencing now. This is called normalizing in neuroscience terms. And it is something that we can do by asking key questions. And the question that's most useful here is what's not unique about this situation? Not to discount or to disconnect ourselves from all the things we should pay attention to, but who has experienced a similar crisis? Or who's going through the same thing I am right now in the midst of this crisis, and how could we help each other? Another great normalizing question that helps dampen our emotions is feeling this way expected or normal given the current crisis or circumstances? It's powerful to look at what's not unique so that we can take a breath, literally pat ourselves on the back, and acknowledge that there are ways for us to move forward, have new ideas and insights, because while things may be very challenging and very unique for us in this moment, there are others who are probably experiencing the same thing I am, and we can support each other. And moreover, there may be things that have not changed, and those are things that can help me find stability and move forward. Many of you, as I can see through the chat, are colleagues who are in the people profession. When I led HR for a large manufacturing company, we had a couple of very difficult years. We bought 7 competitors and merged them into our corporation. We had changed health plans, and the emergency room out-of-pocket fee had more than doubled. Employees were having lots of challenges with their health insurance, with taking care of their loved ones, and it was just a very complicated time. However, we had never done an employee engagement survey, and it was really important for us, especially those of us in HR, to figure out what does this look like from the employee's perspective. So we did an employee engagement survey. Now, this was back in the days when the employee engagement survey results came in a big manila envelope through the US mail. So when the packet of results arrived, I stepped into the conference room and had my 13 HR managers join me. And I unsealed the envelope and pulled out the survey results, and we passed them around. And we started to look at the data. And what we learned was employees valued the benefits plan more than anything else in our current culture. But it was so much better than what they saw and experienced from their friends and colleagues in other companies. What we learned was that they wanted more communication and more dialogue and more usable information about the benefits plan. What was important here was that we took a lot of time and effort to pick up the lens of the employee and to look at ourselves through their eyes and let them tell us what they're seeing. Now, we can do that without doing a big engagement survey and waiting for results. We can dampen our emotions by repositioning the stress that we're experiencing in the crisis and look at it through a variety of other lenses. What does this look like if I were to look at it through the employee perspective? What if I take the lens of my customers and see what they're experiencing in this moment? What if I take the lens of the community and what's happening in the neighborhoods around our facilities or where our products and services are offered? Picking up all these different lenses and looking at the situation and the stressor and the crisis through a lens that's not your own dampens our emotions and gets them to neutral to slightly positive, opens our prefrontal cortex so we can have a new idea or insight, and lets us move forward. So those are the 5 ways to dampen emotions so you can find your way without losing your mind. So before we go forward, I'd like Brian to take a look at the Q&A. or in the Q&A or the chat, wherever you happen to be, and see what kind of questions you might have about these 5 ways to dampen your emotions and to dampen your stress and to dampen the crisis so you can have an insight aha moment and move forward even in the midst of the stress. What
Yes,
are we seeing,
Jeff.
Brian?
Yeah, so please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. We can handle it either way. We did get a question a couple minutes ago, though, from Willie Steiner, who was asking about the lists of emotions and how can we get those?
Great. That's a great question. So you can actually Google emotional vocabulary list or emotional literacy list. You'll see 1,000 come up. Some are models and diagrams. Some are just lists of emotions that are alphabetical. I have one that I will add to the handout that you will receive by email. So that you can have a 2-page list of emotions that's alphabetized. The important thing is just to get something that you can look at quickly and start to seek out the right emotion and name it in the moment. Don't spend a lot of time memorizing lists. That's not a good use of your brain.
And Jocelyn is also suggesting to Google something called Wheel of Emotions.
Yep.
And I've seen Richard Boyatzis, who speaks a lot in our field and written a ton.
Yeah.
I believe in his presentations, he'll show kind of this enormous wheel. And maybe it's even that, a wheel of emotions that tend to describe pretty much everything. Svetlana is asking, what about a question like, if I were to look back on this situation 5 years from now, what would I say or notice? Is something like that helpful?
It does. When we put our brains in a future state, it turns out you can't be in the midst of an amygdala hijack and be stressed while you're envisioning the future. It's the same as that curiosity question, what can I learn, even though I can't change things? When we're curious about something or we're looking into the future, our emotions drop to that neutral to slightly positive space, and our prefrontal cortex has an opportunity to light up with a new idea. Yes, it's a great question to ask yourself. What does the future look like, and what do I see if I put myself out there?
What to do, Marjan is saying, what to do when you dampen your emotions and those of your coworkers, but your CEO doesn't seem to be able to do that.
Yeah, so it turns out that it's great if you teach this to everyone that you interact with. It's a very simple thing to do, and I tend to teach it to my coaching clients who teach it to their teams and people they interact with on a regular basis. I taught it to my family, and when our son was in 5th grade, I actually had him use his words to describe how his day was at school, because he would just tell me that when I asked, how was your day at school, he'd say, I was fine. What'd you do? Nothing. So then I started to ask, so how did you feel at school today? And then I would get emotions. So I would ask you to be courageous enough to go to your CEO and say, look, times are tough. I need your help. Here's one thing you can do to help us. And when I do these webinars or live keynotes or training, I want to give you the opportunity to use me as an excuse. Go to your CEO and say, hey, I was on this webinar with this guy who said, look, you got to name your emotions or do these things to dampen the stress. And you are doing things that are not dampening stress. Here's the handout or here's a link to the recording, and blame it on me and let me play the bad cop, if you will, and offer up new ways for the CEO or anybody else to really be your ally in helping people to dampen the stress. Let's
Harris
take one more,
Ginsburg.
Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a comment, but Harris Ginsburg is pointing out regarding Richard Boyatzis' work, he talks about when you get in touch with hope and gratitude, that of course is switching the amygdala to raise positive emotions. And he's suggesting that's, of course, probably another way to dampen the reaction that you're having.
It is. It's a great one. Hey, Harris, how are you? Yes, when we jump into moments of gratitude, you can't be in the midst of an amygdala hijack and really come up with, what am I really grateful for? What really went positive today? I have some my coaching clients who every night just write down 3 things that were favorable. Sometimes gratitude is a little bit of a stretch for some people, but just think 3 things that went well today. All right, let's move on. Okay, so now that we've dampened emotions, now we need to be able to be a leader in the crisis. And maybe that's not the same way we led when things are on maintenance or on cruise control, or there wasn't a crisis or a major change happening. Leading is not always from the front of the room or from your perspective. Years ago, It was time to hire someone on my team, and we hadn't actually hired anybody on my team from outside the company for a long time. And so we kind of knew all the HR things to do to get somebody on board. But it was a pretty big organization. And so I kind of put myself in the other person's shoes. And I thought, when she arrives for her first day, she's not even going to be in our office. She's going to be in the company orientation for 2 days. And even though they sent her an email, how is she going to feel and what is it going to be like to be in her shoes? So I rethought what I did, and I got my perspective as an observer. So what I decided to do was, on the day that she was to arrive for orientation, I met her out in front of the building, greeted her, welcomed her, and literally walked her through everything she needed to do to be in place for orientation. How to get through security. It turns out the orientation was not on the main floor. You had to take an elevator and go down a really kind of a maze of hallways, which she would have never found on her own. Introduced her to the trainers, kind of got some people at her table to introduce themselves, and got her settled in. And then I got back to the office, and I realized I needed to do that for the whole week, put myself in her shoes and observe how things were going to go. And we changed up the whole onboarding for her whole first week based on what we thought we would see through her eyes and what she would experience. And I just kind of took my leader hat off, forgot the org chart, got rid of all the HR checklist. Yes, we had done all those, but put myself in her shoes. As a leader in times of crisis, it's time to lead with curiosity, not to go on the assumptions or to lead the way you led 8 weeks ago, 12 weeks ago. Be in the back of the room. If you're the one leading the Zoom meeting or in front of the audience, put yourself in the back of the room. And what does it look like? What do you hear yourself saying? And what does the audience, the team, the people in the room need from you right now? Not what do they need from you as a leader? So be an observer. See things, sense things, hear things, feel things. Put yourself in the experience from your team's perspective and stay curious. Next, ask, what does the team need from me right now to be safe, to take the next step, to work on that project, to be certain for the next 3 days? It's not always about budget or tools, although that may be exactly what they need, but in times of crisis, they may need much more or many different things from you than you used to provide for them. And ask, what's the one thing the team needs to move forward? Our brains want momentum. We want to be able to take the next step, not necessarily have all the answers for the next 15 weeks because no one knows what those answers are. But as a leader, when you lead with curiosity, you're being empathetic. You're experiencing and feeling things from the position of others on your team and the people around you. And asking, what's the one thing the team needs next from me to move forward is critical. Our brains also are able to move forward when we have certainty and clarity. And a lot of times as leaders, we don't communicate so clearly. I don't know about you, but I kind of like TED Talks. And it's a really interesting format. Why do we love TED Talks? Why in 15 minutes or less do we feel like we know exactly what that presenter has been through and what they've been sharing with us? Why does it make us feel like we're capable of stepping forward and moving on with that topic, even though we've never heard of that topic before, or seen that idea, or experienced what they experienced? Well, it turns out that if you're a TED Talk presenter, and I have not been, but a lot of my professional speaker friends have been, you get a TED Talk coach. You spend 6 months or more crafting every single word, every single step on the stage, every word on the slide, every moment that you're communicating is not scripted. It is created with intention. And the person who speaks has had 6 months or more to literally embody that message for 15 minutes. And that's why it lands. I don't know why. I don't know how we can have 6 months of prep to communicate in the moment when you have to lead a meeting this afternoon and you're in the midst of a crisis. But here are the ways that your brain can take what is a question or uncertainty or things that aren't clear for you or the team and turn them into insights and clarity and messages that are bright as light bulbs so that they land in the listener's brain, just like a TED Talk seems to land in the audience's brain so clearly and so easily. One is to identify your intention. You may know what you're going to talk about, but what's your intention for that presentation, for that phone call, for that meeting, even for the email? What's the intent behind what you're communicating? I coach a CEO, and he was getting ready to make a presentation to a large group of community leaders, and he has a lot of data around this topic. The topic was education, and he has lots and lots of statistics. And in our coaching session, he said, I'm really nervous about this presentation, but it's because I know all this data, but I think they've seen this data before, or they're pretty smart. This information is not going to be brand new. And so I asked, while you're stressed right now in this moment, what is your intention for this meeting, this presentation with that audience? And he thought for a moment. You could almost sense his emotions dropping to neutral to slightly positive, and you could sense that his prefrontal cortex was opening because he didn't say anything. He just thought and reflected, and he said, I want them to know the story of what it's like to be a student who succeeds when everything else said she couldn't succeed. So his intent was to convey a real life story, not to convey statistics or data to this particular audience. What is your intention? What is your message? And what's the best way to make sure that lands in the brains of your audience? When we're communicating, especially by email, it's important to put the bottom line on top. You really need to create the moral of the story, the bottom line, the aha moment, the thing you want them to do or know, and put it right at the top of the email. Now, as leaders, we tend to write really long emails. We tell a story. We give a lot of context. We think that's helpful. I'm going to challenge all of us to start communicating with the subject line and the first sentence or two of the email to be the bottom line, the moral of the story, the thing you need, or the thing that you want them to do. And then say, for those of you who want additional context or background, here are 2 more paragraphs that you can look at if you're interested. So it's not that you're withholding information, but be clear and put the right meaning on top. The bottom line needs to be on the top. That helps it land in the listener's and recipient's brain. And finally, our brains love a message when it's short and brief and nice and sweet. As a leader, especially in a town hall or when we're leading a meeting, we may think we have to be the loudest voice in the room and talk the longest. That is not true. Your message needs to be the shortest and the clearest. Use metaphors, analogies, movie scenes, music themes. Take the entire message that you're trying to get across and see if you can put it into 7 words or less. Take about 5 or 10 minutes to do that, and that's your key message. For example, let's say we're a team and we're going to have to make a lot of changes as we lead and do our work through the next 8 weeks of this COVID crisis. I could tell you what all my speculation might look like, but if you're a movie fan and you were around in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s to see them, I might say something like, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you would immediately think, if you've seen the movie, oh, we're going to go through a lot of challenges. There may be some danger. There's going to be some uncertainty. We're going to have some victories. And we're probably going to go through a lot of really complex emotional scenes in the next 8 weeks. But that's my starting point, as opposed to trying to tell you what I think the future looks like. So short and brief is nice and sweet to our brains, and it's exactly what the listener needs to hear and start with. I worked for a large manufacturing company once. We were actually created a metal that was a commodity. It was such a commodity, we only made 1 or 2 pennies per pound in profit margin for every pound we sold. And as competition got tough and things started to get very, very scary financially and for the entire market for that metal, we reconvened and decided, what is it we need to do to differentiate ourselves, even though we're in the midst of a crisis around everything we do? It turns out that we had a lot of competitive advantages, but they were inside our own manufacturing plants. It meant that we really needed to figure out, how do we work better together? and how do we get more efficient, and how do we get our commodity product to our customers faster than our competitors. So we did some weird things. Even though it was the midst of a crisis, we held offsites. We actually spent money to get people together to rethink and recreate how we communicate and how we operate as teams and how to get the product to the customer faster. We didn't have all the answers, but we knew we were in the midst of a crisis. So when you're a leader in the midst of a crisis, it's not about having all the answers to the questions that are being posed. The most important thing is to be honest and to answer the questions that you do have answers to. Communicate what you know, but also what you don't know. The president of our company at the time said, I don't know how all of this is going to play out because we are a commodity product and all of our competitors are experiencing the exact same crisis. But what I do know is we could probably beat them by communicating better, improving our efficiencies inside the facilities we work at, and getting the product to the customer faster, which we did. When you don't know the answer to a question or you're not sure what the future is, say so. It turns out that dampens the listener's emotional amygdala, gets their emotions in that neutral to slightly positive state, and lets them know that you have certainty and clarity about what you know and what you don't know at this moment. Be honest, be authentic, and be the leader the team needs you to be. Also, we are gathering our teams together in ways we didn't think about before. Zoom, conference calls, we're not always in a meeting in person together, but even if you are, craft a specific purpose for why you're bringing the team together and make sure your message and the format of that meeting makes a difference. If it's a staff meeting, that means it's going to be more frequent. We're going to make decisions, review our work, and those are our actions, the things we're going to do next to move that work forward. If you're doing a town hall for all the employees, though, it's got to be a very different meeting. You've got to create your intention for your message. You've got to give as much certainty and clarity about where you are now and what you see and what you know is going to happen in the near future, and let them know what is not likely to happen in the near future so that people can leave that town hall and go forward and do the work that they need to do without actually being fearful, and more importantly, not making up stories that aren't true. They've heard from the leader, they've heard from you, and now they can go off for the next day or week and be confident in that work. And now is the time to create a competitive advantage during a crisis. Just like the company that I worked for, where we did off-site training to figure out how do we rethink our teams and make ourselves rise above this crisis while our competitors aren't looking. What's the one thing that could differentiate us? I want to encourage you to take time during this crisis and think about, if we were to have a virtual strategy retreat for half a day or a full day, what would be not our new normal? What's the new next we want to create that's going to differentiate us from our competitors, that's going to make what we do even better for our customers and clients when we emerge from this? We are not going back to normal. That is not going to happen. And even though some things may look that way, the context that we do our work or lead our teams or provide our products and services or interact with our customers will never be the same again. Now is the time for your strategic virtual offsite to ask the question, what's the new next that I think we're going to create going forward? So I'd like you to go into the chat now and think, if you were to have that virtual offsite with your team or your organization right now, and you were to gather them together, write a description or a sentence or a phrase that says what you see as your new next as you emerge from the current crisis, whenever that is. What are some of the things you see as the new next?
We'll be looking for your responses in the chat panel. Challenge with care from Jira Lou Johnson. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge with care. Flexibility from Gloria Dubé. Geography is meaningless from Luke.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a good one. As coaches, addressing the trauma coming out of this situation. Less business travel, more remote team sessions. More spillover of life and work.
Mm.
Schools that work for all students. Fully virtual team workshops that have never been done before. Increased empathy, more receptive to change. Ooh, less trust of government. Stronger unity. More gig workers.
Ah,
Carol Ryan Ertz, increased openness to possibilities. James Dillon, help people express their own talent in this digital way. Virtual team coaching from Nina.
excellent.
A lot of virtual, of course, building trust with new clients virtually.
Great. So those are great examples, and I'm sure there'll be some more coming in. What I want to make you aware of is that your brain is not stuck in the crisis. Your brain can think about the future, and your brain can start to create insights around what is the new next, even though you're not there yet. And I hope today that you've been able to find 5 ways you can dampen your emotions and then have a new idea come into play. And as a leader or a peer on a team, that you can be an observer and put yourself in the shoes of others and experience what that looks like. That you can communicate with greater clarity and certainty because that's what your listeners need right now. And that as you craft your messages, you're focused on the bottom line, the moral of the story, short and sweet, lands in people's brains. So then they can go off and do what you and their customers and their peers need them to do. Our brains are fascinating things, but they don't get stifled during a crisis. And I hope today you found some ways to um, find your way without losing your mind in today's current crisis. Brian, there's some key messages that we want to share with everybody before they leave today. Can you share with us
Absolutely.
what those
And
are?
by the way, everyone is giving you praise and praise, Jeff, here
Oh,
in the
thank you.
session notes here. A couple of things. First of all, we would love it at CoachSource if nearly everyone here would be willing to complete our new trends survey in the coaching field. So if you're an executive coach, if you're an internal coach, or if you manage coaching for an organization, for a company, the studies that have made us famous, we're repeating the trends survey, and it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to fill out. It's at coachsource.com/research. Of course, it's free. And then if you have completed it, you'll get a copy of our trends survey once it is done. So we felt that it was time to relaunch it despite the situation, was we were already intending to. And we hope that people might have a little more time around, that they'd be willing to click on the link and fill it out. So you can see the link there. Jeff also just posted it in the chat as well. Of course, maybe many of you know that this is International Coaching Week, which started yesterday. I did a webinar for the Philippines yesterday. Jeff is doing this for us today, and there's lots of different events going on throughout the coachosphere, if that's a term. Never used that term before. My mind is in a creative place, I guess, Jeff. So, and then the third announcement we want to make is CoachSource is launching a brand new coaching service called Leading Through Crisis. So we rushed this out in just a few weeks' time. Jeff was on the team that was part of this. What we're doing is a 6-week intensive virtual coaching program intended for leaders at a very good rate. And you can see the rate there is much lower than anything we normally charge, which is actually built possibly for any leader who wants to just get started and even use a corporate credit card if they're allowed to, so they can get started and get with a coach immediately. We're only offering this to start through May 31st for now. And what makes this program intriguing is that the coaches have been specifically selected by Jeff and his team as coaches who have either led through crazy trauma crisis times, and or they've coached other leaders who've been through some of this as well. So they're very experienced coaches. And on the next page, I believe you might have my webinar, Jeff, and there we go. So I'm going to do a webinar about leading through crisis, coaching in a crisis, later in this month on May 27th at 10 o'clock Pacific. And what this slide doesn't yet show you is we've actually added 3 panelists. So we have a former CEO who's now one of our coaches, who had to lead his company during the 2008 downturn and during 9/11. We have a CHRO who's now a coach of ours, who had a number of difficult situations, including her CEO dying while she was in charge. We also have another coach of ours who's a licensed clinical psychologist and still does rotations at Kaiser. He's going to join us in between rotation for as many minutes as we can grab him to give us the perspective from a psychologist turned coach as well. So this webinar, of course, is free. And you can note the date here. If you're already on our mailing list, you'll already be notified about this. So with that, here's some ways to connect with us in different ways, shapes, or forms. Jeff is incredibly active on social media. He's a fun person to follow if you don't already on social media avenues. So feel free to consider doing that as well. Jeff,
and we will send you, and my pleasure, we will also email to all of you who registered a document called the coaching questions. So all the questions I asked, and not just the ones I showed on the screen, but we'll give you those so that you can ask those of you and your team anytime, and a guide to how to communicate with certainty and clarity. I'll also throw in the my favorite list of emotional vocabulary list so that you can see what I use, and you're welcome to use that as well.
Delicious, says one of the attendees, Lynn. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And please stay in touch. Thank you, Jeff, for another fabulous one of these. We'll get the recording up somewhere so people can pick up that recording as well. We hope everyone stays safe, and we'll see you on May 27th. Thank you, everybody.